Hello, and welcome back to the Talent Pieces podcast. I'm your host, Carlos Delcid. And here, we're all about talent and culture for entrepreneur, startup founders, and business leaders looking to scale their company effectively. If you find today's episode helpful, don't forget to share it with a fellow entrepreneur. You can follow the Talent Pieces podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining to one more episode of the Talent Pieces podcast. Today, I have Robert Daniel joining us. Very excited to have you here, man. We'll love to know more about your story and, of course, what's the fintech space in Atlanta.
Great to be here. Thanks for the time.
All right, Robert. So, just if you can share a little bit more about yourself, how you got to where you are today, and then we will for sure talk about, the fintech space in the city.
Yeah, that'd be great. I didn't always start in startups. I guess I graduated at Georgia Tech in 2001 when startups were contracting. So
it was not a thing.
No, it was not a. Well, it was a thing, but the world was blowing up at that point in time.
.com.
It was an interesting time. So I went a different route. I went more of the hedge fund route. Went up to New York. I was up there for 15 years. So did a lot of things between hedge funds and reputation management in a company and consulting, but found myself in more of the finance and fintech space for the past 6 years, managing roundtables up there.
Okay.
And then the pandemic hit. I wanted to come back home to kind of get back to Atlanta, born and raised down here. Atlanta is really booming, and I wanted to figure out how to fit in. Atlanta is actually kind of boomed with my family as well. My dad, he owned a construction company, and my grandfather actually, and the companies worked on everything from the Atlanta airport to the King and Queen building here, Home Depot headquarters, E-Trade up in Alpharetta, Colony Square, all these big landmarks and these big buildings around Atlanta. So I always found that quite fascinating. And I had this idea of what if I was to have some sort of impact in Atlanta and
help contribute in a different phase. I love that. And that talks about deep roots into the city. And I was even driving home the other day with my mom, and I told her, like, Mom, I know the child of the guy that helped build the King and the Queen towers in Sand Springs. And she was like, oh, wow. Because, especially if you're not from Atlanta, we kind of take things for granted if, we see them every day. But if you're not from town, they get to see it, and it's very impressive. Same for the airport, same for Colony Square. Like, you see the value and how relevant they are for the city. Now, in this next phase where you're trying to, bring that value and that kind of legacy to the city, what's the fintech space? And of course, what's your collaboration around that space?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was looking at. I think there's the opportunity to build teams that go on and create these big companies. We have so many amazing corporations here that are focused on fintech. I see Atlanta as being one of the number one leaders in the fintech space here. 70% of the transactions go through Atlanta. So we have that component. We're known as a payments capital. We have a lot of innovative companies. Folks like Visa, MasterCard have put offices here. NCR, Deluxe, Fiserv, they're all here trying to make that impact and tap into the amazing educational system here. You've got Georgia Tech, UGA, a lot of the HBCUs that are kind of feeding the system, right. Georgia State and the Georgia FinTech Academy kind of combining together to take that talent and create opportunities for students to go directly into these companies and already have an understanding of what fintech is.
So my question to you will be, and this is, of course, your opinion, but also some facts that I was, researching before this conversation is Atlanta the fintech capital of the world? A, and B, what does this mean to the ecosystem?
I'll take fintech capital of the world. Why not? There's lots of fintech stations around the country, around the world. I think we do it really well. We have a great mixture of the right balance of corporations, startups, educational programs. We have an idea around how do we feed the entrepreneurial ecosystem? How do we drive that forward? So we have that innovation on the front end. And then we also have other components we have some great investors here. We have people who want to give back and contribute their knowledge, their treasure and capabilities that allow those things to foster. We have organizations like Fintech Atlanta, the TAG Fintech Society, that are kind of driving opportunities to grow. And then we even have the Independent Community Bankers Association, ICBA. They put their innovation think tech here in Atlanta, so that drives that next layer of innovators trying to tap into banks.
Okay, well, that's fascinating, and I wanted to share some with our audience, some facts that I found, but also I want to tap back into something that you were talking about, nurturing the ecosystem. But before, just fintech in Georgia, based on Fintech Atlanta website, has processed 300 billion with B global payment transactions. 2 out of every 3 transactions with a U.S. card pass through Atlanta, for just general commerce. And 6 out of the 10 largest payment processing firms are based in the city. I think those are big numbers. $49 billion in revenue generated from, the fintech ecosystem.
It's huge.
Do you think there's a second player? Like, how far do you think the second biggest city in fintech is compared to Atlanta?
I don't look behind me that much. I think so. I think we're definitely a payments town, so we have that capability. And there's New York that would probably be more of a wealth tech town,
right?
So Silicon Alley up there. I think we focus. We definitely have that payment structure, kind of going back into the '60s when it was easier to transact some of the processes here, and even the Atlanta Fed has been instrumental in having a lot of those payments structured through Atlanta. And then you have other players like Equifax who have come in and they check different components of part of a payments or lending kind of component. So I think we just continue to rise, and that's what's kept us moving up in the charts.
Okay.
I don't know who that next competitor is from that aspect. We just kind of have that clear winner from there. And then it's kind of funny when you go out to conferences like Money 2020, everybody's saying, look at all these Atlanta people there. I mean, you
ATL's in the house.
ATL's in the house. It's very noticeable because a lot of the folks just love doing business here in Georgia.
Right.
And they continue to move and put more infrastructure down here.
So, now that you mentioned that, and going back to nurturing the ecosystem, we've talked about this, or I've mentioned this during the podcast before, just generally for the startup community. But for the fintech space in specific, there's also very intentional actions from different players, because you were mentioning like big banks, the Fed, the startup ecosystem, like fintech catalyst. So tell me, what's your role as a fintech catalyst, and what role does ATDC plays into this bigger picture?
Yeah, I think ATDC has always been integral in startups in Georgia. We've been around for 45 years, and I know that shocks and amazes a lot of people. We've had some pretty fantastic companies come through the door. Greenlight is one of them, and then you just have people that just kind of feeds into the ecosystem and allows the opportunity to grow. So it's always been around as an opportunity for all startups in Georgia. So startups can come to us either at the ideation stage, mainly when they work with a catalyst like myself. It's at the MVP stage, and we're there to kind of help push them along the way, kind of like adding nitrous into the tank to say, let's get some growth, let's get some more scaling. But really, that the formulation era of building something at the ideation is very hard, and we just provide mentors, catalysts, other resources, knowledge to help get them along the way. We don't take portions of the cap table, but we will help them find investors, especially around Atlanta, but also in and around the country as well.
Are some of those investors or some of those advisors that you can get for these startups part like the big players nurturing the next generation, and at the same time trying to have some footprint within that new ideation or intellectual property that is being built?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it. There's a lot of founders who've kind of gone this way before, and they want to give back. So it doesn't matter at which stage they are. I have some people who are still kind of going through the program and very much involved. They haven't graduated the ATDC program, but they still want to mentor and give back in some aspects. So it's really about reaching back down to that next rung down on the ladder and lifting somebody up. And I think anybody can do that. And I think that makes the entrepreneur better, because when they teach something, they kind of reinstitute that in their mind on how to do it better.
Yeah, and it brings back some year one things that you wouldn't consider, right? Every time that I have, we don't measure entrepreneurs or startup cycles as founders from year 1 to year 4, but it is a bar. Like what you face in the year 1 has nothing to do with a year 4, right?
Right.
Right now that Puzzle, it's coming to its 4th anniversary next week, so congrats Puzzle team. I look back, right, on this new generation, guys that are barely starting, and I'm like, if you're a service company, this is what I will avoid doing, or this is a mistake that I regret. I would have loved someone to tell me. And that, aside from paying it forward, it makes you feel good, because it makes you, think back of everything that you have gone through and overcome as an entrepreneur. But I also feel like having a catalyst is a great added value for the fintech community.
And I think one other thing too is a mentor or a coach or a catalyst, you're going to learn too, because what it takes to start a company now versus 4 years ago,
different game.
So different.
Different game.
Like marketing now is bonkers compared to what it was 4 years ago.
Especially with AI.
Yes.
I think it has made everyone's homework easier on removing something from your to-do list of the day. But it has made it so much harder to have an impact, because even if you are using 20 different AI models, it's AI, it will get it faster out there, you'll be able to reach more people faster. So the longer game, it's harder, but it will help you tackle things very, very fast.
Yeah.
So what's your prediction for the fintech space for 2025, especially talking about AI and how it starts to not integrate, but be embedded with everything that these new founders and this new generation of fintech it's coming with? Hey there, quick break. If you're enjoying today's session, don't forget to hit subscribe and give us those 5 stars. It will help us grow a lot. Now, back to our conversation.
I think that's the key. We've seen this trend over the past few years of kind of more embedded finance. You see things built into operations, and that's almost like integrated marketing, as we've seen. Everybody wants more integration. AI can help that. I think we've seen some challenges over the past few years, some ambiguity in the regulatory aspect.
Right.
How that's going to change post-inauguration, we don't quite know, and what that will look like. The idea is probably some regulations will come down. I think a lot of finance companies will still move slowly. Fintech moves a lot slower than most people think.
Huh.
It's if you look at it, it moves fast, but it's slow, because you've got a lot of regulatory components around this. It's not something that, even if you pull back from the regulatory, one of the things that I think will be big this year is moving towards that is still vendor management.
Right.
And even if you think regulations will come off there, people will still continue to do vendor management. You still have people's personal identifiable information, PII.
Right.
So there's components that need to be kind of you need to tread carefully around those.
So in this AI generation, what's the role of cybersecurity? And we were just talking with someone that is in the cybersecurity space that I would love to have in the podcast, but just a high level thought on how people should be worried on their information, but also how startup founders should think about day one cybersecurity if I'm in the fintech space.
I think day one is tough because dealing with a lot of founders, they're just trying to get fraud, and cybersecurity is important.
Yes.
But it's not as important until it hits them. Like I was talking with a founder the other day. Most of the time, as a founder, you're just trying to go in there and put out fires. I'm just trying to survive to the next day. You've got your long-term goals. You're trying to get to a fraud-protected, cybersecurity-protected goal, but you're also trying to just get there.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that are going to kill you as a founder. So it's hard to kind of bake all of that in there. Once you get your legs under you, then you can build out more robust systems. And I think PayPal was a great example. They just started getting hit with fraud way back when they started. I don't know what they look like now, but that's kind of the component. You're building up to get to that process, and you're going to get hit because the larger you get and the more you're on this radar, and then people are always looking for vulnerabilities, whether it's cybersecurity and fraud. So if you're a payments or a fintech company, you're going to get hit at some point in time. You just have to
be ready.
And then you're going to learn a bunch of stuff, and hopefully you get hit early so you can say, okay, this is what I need to implement before I move to like 5,000 people or 10,000 or 100,000 people on my platform.
Yeah. And I think this is something that is not just a founder mentality, right? But it's also everyone in the team, from the developers, from the customer service individuals, customer success, salespeople. Like we're dealing with a lot of sensitive data. And most importantly, we're dealing with money.
Yes.
There's a lot of money in the table, right? And how we can be careful with that. And again, in an AI world where it might be a lot easier to draft an email, you probably get this email even if you don't have a company. But hey, can you update my payroll information? They were very bad. But recently I got an email from, it was a phishing attempt, but it looked legit. Email signature, and it was like, hey, Carlos, would you mind just updating this? If I wouldn't know the person that they were trying to impersonate, I would have had my doubts and probably reply like, I will encourage you to contact whoever does payroll. I'm not the person, but like you need to be ready for those things, right? Because they're getting better and better, and you need to have like those components, security components that will have your team ready, but also your customers.
Yeah, I don't think the velocity has increased exponentially like I was kind of thinking it might. I think it's just more the quality of the fraud. And that's the scary component, because at some point in time, voice recordings or digital pictures or digital video where people can say, oh, I need you to send this. Somebody's FaceTiming me. Oh, it's my grandma. She needs money. She got locked up. Wait a minute, my grandmother.
Right?
Isn't running around like that. So it's things like that where it's going to become harder. And I'm kind of that innovation and that innovation belief that we'll always kind of keep pushing towards more solutions.
Right.
So as things get more robust, we'll have solutions that kind of contract that, and they'll be equal, because you've got some pretty brilliant people who are trying to solve those problems.
I mean, as entrepreneurs, we're supposed to make it happen and figure it out. So
it's the name of the game.
It's the name of the game, precisely. Now, thinking about startup founders and the entrepreneur journey, it's very challenging. It's very overwhelming. I'm not trying to scare anyone away from the entrepreneurship life. It's great. It's very rewarding, but it's also very hard. And I like to have the blunt, honest feedback. We were talking about that earlier today. But also trying to have some fun around it. So tell me a little bit more about that comedy in entrepreneurship, and what are your initiatives around that?
Yeah, stand-ups and startups. So that really came to mind because I realized as I was coaching founders, more people needed to laugh. What's big for me with stand-ups and startups, it also caters to the community. So we use comedy and improv as a foundation in these three pillars of connections, culture, and community, and bring those together and kind of tap into those and help vitalize those. But from one aspect, I wanted to make sure that founders had an opportunity to relax. Laughing together is a great mental health thing. And then also laughing together builds that culture if you're bringing your team together.
Yeah, and especially because regardless of what you're building, whether it's fintech, service companies, e-commerce, you will face some very similar challenges that at some point can be very overwhelming if you're facing them today, but you can probably laugh about it next week. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, I just deal with super random situation. And it's like, did that really happen?
Yeah.
And I think that's, the more we share, it's just creating awareness, but at the same time, it's, hey, it's already done. Let's just have some fun.
I say you can either laugh about it or cry about it at the end of the day. And I choose to laugh about it. There's so many things in the world where you're like, this is not the best, but you just kind of got to chuckle, grit down, and move forward. And we are in the hustle culture. And I think the challenge with the hustle culture is we're always taught you got to keep hustling, but you do have to take a break because I like to think of ourselves as like a race car. I love 911s, but I'm not going to keep driving my 911 around the track without taking care of it.
Right.
You know, you got to put oil in it. You got to let it rest for a second. You got to switch to tires. Same thing with entrepreneurs. You got to take care of yourself. You got to make sure that you're intact to keep moving forward and moving around that track to win whatever race you're going after. So sometimes it's all about taking that pit stop,
right,
and making sure you're okay.
And sometimes finding that self-awareness that you need to take a pause, it's very hard. And I love what you're doing, because as a community, sometimes you can get a peer feedback on saying, hey, guy, take a break. That's
why I'm a catalyst. A catalyst coach, a good catalyst or coach should be able to go in and be able to tell you that. You need someone as a good mentor who's going to tell you that every so often. I just had a mastermind class where that was put back in front of me. Even the coaches need coaches to be able to operate at the right level.
The coach of the coach.
Yeah.
So one last question that I had for you, and it's, because of the Talent Pieces podcast, we talk about finding the right talent, whether it's local or international. But how has building the right team play a role in your success or the companies that you advise success? And what have you learned about finding and nurturing great talent along the way?
That's a great question. Kind of going back to stand-ups and startups, that's why I put culture in the middle as the middle pier,
right,
because establishing a good culture in your team is so important. Being a leader, you have to drive that culture. You have to be part cult of personality, and I like servant leadership.
Yeah.
So you give back. You're giving people the opportunity to follow you. You're not demanding it of them. So there's two different schools of thought. I think that's my approach, because you should feed them. You should make sure that they're along the journey and aligning with that vision and mission, building that culture, establishing the right communications.
Yeah.
And that kind of, you're there to protect them. The SEALs do that so well. And they usually have that one leader, but everybody's there on that same mission and vision, going together and establishing that forward movement. And then they train. You should train your team. You should educate them. A lot of people are just there, well, they'll work for me for a little bit and leave. Your best people will leave if they're not being fed.
Yeah.
And you want to keep them there. And then when they do leave, celebrate it, because then they're going to go out and hopefully they're starting something, and then you just help create something exponential.
I like to believe that, as much as I would love my puzzle team to stay there forever, not everyone will be there forever. And I hope they are not, because it's their next level, their next challenge. Unless someone ends up becoming the CEO, which I hope for. I really look forward for them to keep having that growth and knowing that they had a positive career impact while working with Puzzle. I think that's something very meaningful that I look forward. And many entrepreneurs do, right? Like the impact that they will do to their business, but also that their business will have in their individual careers and in their individual success.
100%. And I think you said something so important there. It's like hoping somebody else comes in. We're all replaceable.
Yeah.
And we want somebody to come in and fit in as that CEO or that leader, so that, we're going to move on. We're not here. We're not going to be alive for 1,000 years. We don't have that healthcare system yet. Maybe we'll get there. But even
AI,
if we didn't
figure it out.
Yeah. But we are replaceable, and we should be. And that was one of the most important things my father taught me at an early age, being that entrepreneur, is how you look at your team and how you cultivate them up to hopefully take over those skills and become future leaders and become replaceable. And then hopefully your company will outlive you.
I hope so. It's nurturing the next generation, and also, try to enjoy retirement life. At some point, you need to take a break too. We're just talking about that, right? It's a cycle. It's a different stage, but definitely hope that by the time you get to retire, there's someone else ready to take your role and take it to the next level. Maybe that I will feel it's the best positive outcome.
Yeah. Even in nonprofits too, you got to find the next leaders.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree with that. So, Rob, really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. Really enjoyed. I appreciate what you're doing for the fintech ecosystem, and Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye for now. And that's it for today's session. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow the Talent Pieces podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Remember to share this episode with a fellow entrepreneur or business leader if you find today's topic helpful. Bye for now.